In this section, we are going to look at maintaining the cosmic order, the art of sacrifice in Vedic religion. Yajna, or sacrifice, devotion, worship, or offering, refers to a practice in Hinduism, essentially to any ritual done in front of a sacred fire, often with a recitation of mantras. Yajna has been a Vedic tradition described in a layer of Vedic literature called the Brahmanas, or the Brahmanas, as well as the Yajurveda. The tradition has evolved from offering oblations and libations into sacred fire to symbolic offerings in the presence of sacred fire, who is personified as Agni. Agni is the god of fire, but Agni in a Vedic sense is just fire, a bit more of a sort of elemental representation. Yajna rituals related to texts have also been called karmakanda, or ritual works. This is a portion of Vedic literature in contrast with jnanakanda, which is knowledge, the portion contained within the Upanishads, for example. We'll get to the Upanishads later. The proper completion of yajna-like rituals was the focus of the Mimamsa branch of Hindu philosophy as well. And this sort of Mimamsa branch develops out of the Vedic literature, becomes part of what we call Hinduism today. When we're speaking of Vedic religion, yajna have originally been thought to play a central role in rites of passage and life cycle rituals, and they still play an important role in life cycle rituals such as weddings today. Modern major Hindu temple ceremonies, Hindu community celebrations, or monastic initiations may include aspects of Vedic yajna rituals which have been preserved. They might also alternatively include another section of rituals or another type of rituals called agamic rituals. We may get to delve into those a bit more deeply later. But for our purposes now, just think of yajna rituals as rituals that involve tossing things into fire, and fire is a form of sacrifice. When the ritual fire, the divine Agni, the god of fire and the messenger of the gods, was deployed in a yajna, mantras were usually chanted. The hymns and songs sung and the oblations offered into the fire were a form of hospitality toward Vedic divinities and gods. The offerings were believed to be carried by Agni to the gods. Agni carries this message up to higher divinities. The gods, in return, were expected to grant boons and benedictions, and thus the ritual served as a means of spiritual exchange between a sort of godly or divine realm and a human realm, being two distinct lokas. Agni controls the transformation of the message between the lokas, while Agni is also the fire itself. The Vedangas, or auxiliary sciences attached to the Vedic literature, define yajna as follows. Yajna is a sacrifice. It is an act which we surrender something for the sake of the gods. Such an act must rest on the sacred authority, agama, and serve for humans' salvation, srayorta. The nature of the gift is of less importance. It may be a cake, purodasha, a pulse, karu, mixed milk, samnaya, an animal, pashu, the juice of the soma plant, soma, etc. Nay, the smallest offerings of butter, flour, and milk may serve for the purpose of sacrifice. In the Upanishadic times, which we'll get to a little bit later, about 500 BCE onwards, Sakura defined the term yajna in the form of ritual sacrifice around fires by priests to be any personal attitude and action or knowledge that required devotion and dedication. This was quite a broad definition. The oldest Vedic Upanishads, such as the Chandogya Upanishad, which is around 700 BCE, state that what is commonly called yajna is really the chaste life of the student of sacred knowledge. For only through the chaste life of this practice does the student of sacred knowledge and the knower find that what is commonly called istam, or sacrificial offering. It is really the chaste life, or the life of the ascetic, of the student of sacred knowledge. For only having searched for the chaste life does this student find the Atman, or realize the Atman, the true nature of the self. Within this ritual context, Agni is still important, however. Agni becomes a sort of guardian deity of the southeast direction, and is also typically found in southeast corners of Hindu temples, such as in this image on the right-hand side of the slide, when you have more anthropomorphic representations of Agni as opposed to elemental representations. When we're speaking about the Vedic times, Agni is more of an elemental representation. Offerings given to Agni and given to Agni to carry to other gods and deities are typically defined through Vedic yajnas as performed by 4 priests of the Vedic priesthood: the Hota, the Advaryu, the Udgata, and the Brahma. The functions associated with the priests were: the Hota recites the invocations and the litanies drawn from the Rig Veda. He used 3 Rig Veda verses, the introductory verse and the accompanying verse, and a verse that's called the benediction verse. The Advaryu is the priest's assistant and is in charge of the physical details of the ritual, like measuring the ground, the building the altar, and these details are all laid out in the Yajurveda. The focus of the Yajurveda is on rituals, remember. The Advaryu offers oblations. Then you have the Udgata, who is the chanter of hymns, who sets these hymns to melodic structures and would be responsible for memorizing music, which is drawn from the Samaveda. The Udgata, like the Hota, chants the introductory, accompanying, and benediction hymns. So there's a sort of harmonic structure that is replicated through having these 2 individuals chant at the same time. The Brahma is the superintendent of the entire performance and is responsible for correcting mistakes by any means of supplementary verses taken from the Atharva Veda. Offerings are usually 1 or 3 in number. So you might give 1 offering or 3 or 2 or 6, right? But in terms of multiplicants, you use 1 or 3 as the numbers. Fires would be lit at the center of the offering ground, and oblations are offered into the fire. Among ingredients, you might have ghee, which is a clarified butter, milk, grains, cakes, and soma. Then these offerings would sometimes last for only a few minutes, and others were performed over a period of hours, days, or even months. Some yajnas were performed privately, while others were community events. In other cases, yajnas were simply symbolic, such as in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad hymn, "The mind is the Brahman of sacrifice." And the goal of sacrifice, more broadly, is to complete release and liberation, moksha, in the metaphorical sense. When we're talking about physical offerings, the benedictions proffered range from long life to perhaps gaining more friends, or simply better health, or perhaps being reincarnated into a better loka, a heavenly realm, more prosperity, or better crops. For example, may my rice plants and my barley and my beans and my sesame and my kidney beans and my vetches and my pearl and my millet and my proso millet and my sorghum and my wild rice and my wheat and my lentils prosper by this sacrifice. This comes from the white Yajurveda, which is a focus on rituals. Yajnas where milk products, fruits, flowers, cloth, and money were offered are called homa or havan. A typical Hindu marriage involves a yajna where Agni is taken to be the witness of the marriage as well. Now I just want to spend a little bit of time on Soba because very popularly, if you peruse around the internet, there is this hypothesis that was popularized in the United States in the 1960s that soma was maybe some type of like wild magical mushroom, which is totally bogus. In fact, soma is on the bottom left-hand side of the slide here. In the Vedic tradition, soma is a ritual drink of importance among early Vedic Indo-Aryans or Aryans. The Rig Veda mentions soma, particularly the Soma Mandala. The Gita, or the Bhagavad Gita, mentions the drink in chapter 9. It is the equivalent of the Iranian hauma. The texts describe the preparation of soma by means of extracting the juice from the plant, the identity of which is now pretty reasonably hypothesized to be this plant that is pictured here, and both in the ancient religions of the Vedas, the Vedic religion, and in Zoroastrianism, you have this plant mentioned. Of course, there's been much speculation about this, but it is probably the plant somlata, which is pictured here. There's been a number of different descriptions of somlata, but it is typically found in the valleys of the tropical mountains in the Himalayas, and the plant is religiously linked to what becomes later Hinduism, and it is believed to be a major ingredient in this soma drink. The fruits or the follicles taper at both ends, seeds are flat, ovate, comose. The plant is bitter, acrid, cooling. It's an alterant and semi-narcotic. It's emetic. It's also an antiviral and, reputably, quite rejuvenating. In classical Indian medicine, it is considered useful in vitiated conditions of pitta, dyspepsia, and viral infection, as well as hydrophobia, psychopathy, and also general debility. So a sort of all-around good plant to have around. But when you're offering some, of course, this plant is just, or the drink is just tossed into the fire. So for your discussion post, go ahead and come up with 2 threads here. So the first thread is going to focus on the material here and come up with a hypothesis. Based on the material here, how is a cosmological order maintained? What hints are there of what might happen if order is not maintained? And then the second thread is going to focus on the bottom set of questions here. How do we have hints of Vedic ritual transforming over time? Given that this is a Vedic religion, maybe Proto-Hinduism, are there any aspects of it that resemble what we have discussed for Hinduism more broadly so far? Why or why not? Go ahead and make a quick post, and let's keep the discussion rolling.